originally had this panel first, but I thought that talking about kind of AI and how it's progressing was an incredible backdrop actually for this conversation. So we kind of switched up the order, and I've been just incredibly excited about this chat for months. The context is we did a chat about kind of the state of the labor market 2 years ago, and not specifically in terms of AI impact, but just in general, right? Because there's a lot going on, and I think there's so much conversation about agents doing work, long-running context models, and like what does that mean for roles and tasks in an organization? And Maxime and Mar have like incredible perspectives on this with very unique data, and so I'm excited to jump in. Before we get into kicking off, would you all mind do like brief intros, like a little bit more about your background and what you do, and then we can hop in if that works.
Of course. So hi everyone, I am Mark Arpanelli. Really excited to be here. I lead AI and skills research at LinkedIn. So basically my job is to look at all of LinkedIn data with over 1.3 billion members globally and try to answer some of the biggest questions that we all have on how AI is impacting labor market outcomes.
Hi everybody, I'm Maxime Massenkoff, and I'm an economist at Anthropic. And before this, I was an economics professor. So a bit of a pivot, but yeah, really excited.
Cool. And I know we have some slides. I want to jump in and talk about both your like most recent research takeaways. Do we jump in straight into the slides, or what do you?
Sure.
Up to you.
Whatever works.
All right. Well, maybe we'll kick it off. Whose slides are first? Maxime.
Yep.
All right. Let's start with you. So, can you tell everyone? I think one of the things that's so cool about both of your perspectives is you have a unique data set that gives you a window into what's going on in the labor market. So, can you talk a little bit about first Anthropic? What data do you have, and what window does that? How do you use it? What window does that give you? And then can you share a little bit more about, how does that help you answer questions that maybe traditional labor data does not? Yeah.
Sure. So what we try to do with the economic index is every quarter we look at a huge sample of traffic on Claude, on all of our product surfaces, and we just try to describe the work that's being done. And so for all of these tasks that we see, so it could be somebody preparing lecture notes, or coding up a personal website, or doing their taxes, we link that to jobs. And we think that this gives you a really unique insight into the potential and ongoing economic impact of these like AI tools. And so it's a really unique data set. So right now we're the only AI lab kind of publishing it in this much detail. And so a big part of the motivation there is just to get this information out there. Right now, if you're a professional driver, you probably see these Waymos driving around in like San Francisco and Phoenix. And that kind of portends like some changes for the profession, maybe not right away because there's not that many Waymos. What we're trying to do on our team is to say, as soon as our little Waymo finishes a test drive in a parking lot, we kind of get out there and announce it to everybody and say, this is like a new workflow, this is a new automation pattern, and we're going to like report our data in an anonymized way that like helps people prepare.
And then Mar, obviously you have really, really unique data as well. Can you talk a little bit more about what do LinkedIn's got more than 1 billion members. What do you see from them? And how does that give you insight into the economy that maybe like the BLS or other sources, maybe can't?
Yeah. So I think the spirit at LinkedIn is very similar to Anthropic. We really know that there's a lot of noise out there, and we have so much data to bring clarity and to answer many of these questions that are so urgent, so timely, because we're living through a technological change that is massive, can have massive impact, and it's the first time in history that we can actually see it develop in real time, and we can see what happens, and we can mitigate some of the effects. So we use those all the data from our 1.3 billion members who are doing roughly 5 million updates per minute, which is humongous in terms of data.
That's crazy.
And that's anything from updating your profile, adding a new position, to adding a skill, to commenting on a post, to posting something on your feed. So that's really a lot of information that we try to use in a structured way to look at some of very similar questions as Maxime was referring to. So for example, who's getting hired where? Which sectors are growing fast? Which sectors are seeing slowdowns? Can we say why? And share that with members and with employers so that they have the live pulse of the economy and they can see what the richest social network on professionals is saying today about the workforce.
I want to jump in to your latest research, Maxime. And if you want, if you want to see the slide, what might be helpful, I can give you the clicker.
Oh, sweet.
Would love to have you kind of talk through, I had this like, your most recent paper is labor market impacts of AI. I think you've released like 3 papers in the last 4 days or something. So that may not be your most recent research, but yeah, would love to hear about sort of like, what was it about? What does it say about, how roles are being touched by AI? What are the big takeaways? And yeah.
Sweet, yeah. So I might walk up here a little bit.
Yeah, you can walk away. I think you're mic, so you can go, yeah.
Yeah, so I gave the overall pitch of the economic index. So we just want to use our data to provide leading indicators. And this is sort of a portrait of what's going on right now. So this shows the theoretical possibilities for AI. So this is shown in the blue area. And so some job categories like computer and math jobs, business and finance professions, architecture, legal work, all of those have a really high value in that blue area because these are all things that are, at least in theory, feasible for an AI system to do. Usually, like a heuristic for understanding that is you could do this with a virtual coworker. So we all probably did our taxes recently. And I only emailed with my accountant, and it wasn't like a very like embodied act. And so accounting is one of those things that would be in the blue area here, where it's a task that you could at least imagine an AI system doing. The red area shows you what Claude is doing right now, and the red area is much smaller than the blue area. It's highest in one of the realms that like Anthropic is known for, so these computer and math professions. So we often see Claude doing a lot of coding tasks. But it's worth emphasizing that there's a lot of things that are just in the white area here, which are tasks that you couldn't even imagine doing with a virtual coworker. So this is, or with an AI. So this is developing relationships, testing machinery, installing parts, or positioning patients on a hospital bed. There's a lot of stuff that AI can't do. We haven't observed Claude chopping vegetables.
Yes.
So
yet.
Yeah. So I think this when this plot came out, I think it was sort of a Rorschach test where a lot of people looked at it and like were like a little bit alarmed about the pace of development, like how quickly AI is kind of going into these different professions. For me, I also, at the same time, I see a couple of things. So one is that there's this huge area of tasks where it's really hard to imagine AI putting a huge dent in it. And also just the fact that the red area is a really small share of the blue. So we've only become like performant at a really small share of the tasks that are theoretically possible for AI. So yeah, one other example is responding to customer requests. That's something that we are seeing a lot in increasingly automated ways. So our top line concern on our team is whether this is having any labor market impacts right now. And what we care the most about is the unemployment rate as sort of our metric to watch most closely. So we care about that because when you're unemployed, it means that you want a job and you haven't found one yet. So I think that's something that a lot of people in this room are helping to figure out. And so far, we don't see any impacts on the unemployment rate. So this plot just shows you people in the most exposed jobs. So this would be jobs like computer programming, financial analysis, data science, and customer service, and people in jobs that have no exposure. So like electricians and waiters and jobs like that. And so overall, ever since ChatGPT was released in 2022, there has been no increase in unemployment for these jobs. So on our team, in contrast to maybe sort of having an academic bent, we have the luxury of producing a result even if the causal effect is zero. And so we're not putting this out to say that this is like the final word on the topic. It's more like this is the first time we're measuring it, and we're going to keep coming back to it as sort of like a frontline barometer here. There was one area where we saw some inkling of an impact, and this was looking at new job starts among workers aged 22 to 25. So the youngest workers in the economy, what's the rate at which they're getting hired into these exposed jobs? And so what we see is about a 15% drop in the hiring rate into these new professions. However, the hiring rate isn't as top line as the unemployment rate because a lot could be underlying this. So it could be that these young workers are choosing different careers. And so it's sort of on their side, which would actually be part of like a very healthy response to the kinds of changes that are coming to the labor market. There's not a really strong signal here, and so we're more kind of putting this out as something to watch. But the bottom line for us is like, does this manifest as unemployment? Because that's when we start getting really concerned about the economic impacts.
And then Mar, obviously you've put out some really incredible research as well using your unique data. Maybe we'll do like a clicker switch, but would love to have you share a little bit more about kind of the most recent research you've done. I think your most research basically attributed a slowdown more to like macroeconomic conditions and less like I don't know if secular is the right word, but less directly attributed to AI. But can you share a little bit more about your kind of most recent research and what it's shown?
Yeah, of course. So first, a quick reaction to the last chart. So what Maxime was showing is that actually we do see that there might be some slowdown in hiring for more exposed roles. And we do find that, for example, one of the most emerging first jobs for new software engineering graduates is in finance, which is already showing some qualitative change that might be behind some of these quantitative data. But going back to LinkedIn data, and I'm going to be on this side to balance the room, something that we do is we look beyond exposure. I think everyone out there is thinking about, how many of the tasks of a typical occupation can AI do, and can AI do reliably and consistently? But there's the other aspect. How many of those tasks only humans can do? So that's what we plot here. In the horizontal axis, we have all the stuff that AI can replicate. So the more you are to the right, the more the occupation can be replicated. And I know that is a very tiny font, so I will give some examples in a second. And in a vertical axis, we have the human exposure. How human is the job? How many human tasks are really core to this job? So that shows that even for two occupations that might be highly exposed, such as, let's say, web designer, which is over there, thank you, assistant, and let's say translator, who is over there, the AI exposure is very high for both, but the human exposure is very different. So that means that AI might change them differently, and we already have some evidence, in academia of impact on translators, whereas the impact on web designers and software developers is pointing in a different direction so far. So that is one aspect. The other one is that, again, AI exposure is not everything. It's also important to look at how likely members in these occupations are able to move to different jobs. And to do that, we look at their typical skills, and we compare their skills to other occupations. So it turns out that there's a positive relationship between having higher exposure and being more likely to switch to a different role. And again, going back to one of the most exposed jobs over there, you have marketing manager. Turns out that marketing managers share a lot of skills with many, many other occupations. So it's relatively easy for them to transition to other roles and even to adapt to new technologies. So again, it amplifies this takeaway that it's not just about exposure. It's also about, these are humans who have studied for multiple years, have some of them have experience in the market, and they are able of learning new skills, learning new tools, and changing what they do. And going back to the example of the software engineer just very quickly, and I think we'll go back to this in the discussion, but something that is very counterintuitive that we're finding in our research is that everyone is expecting these highly exposed jobs to disappear. Like, software engineers have received a lot of hatred over the past year, I would say. Everyone is saying, you've been the highest paid job in the Valley for a while, that's gone. We aren't seeing anything on wages yet, but what we are seeing is that companies that adopt GitHub Copilot, which is a technology that arguably can automate software engineers, are actually hiring more software engineers. And they're hiring more software engineers that are experienced and also entry level. And something interesting is that they're changing a little bit in how they're hiring. So there's an increase in requirements for non-programming skills. So software engineers typically, like, you want more programming skills or more specialization in programming skills. Now there's a turn away from that and into people skills. So it looks like companies are trying to hire more of them, but when they hire them, they want to make sure that they can work in teams, they can lead a project end to end, they can collaborate in a team, they can talk to stakeholders, they can influence a non-technical audience. So that is emerging in the data. And again, I think that's really interesting because it shows that the market is way more complex than just, you are likely to be automated, so you're out of a job. There's a lot of forces playing in, and we're starting to see some of those results.
Amazing.
Back to you.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you for walking through the research. I want to double click on a couple pieces of what y'all talked through. I think you're seeing some like canaries in the coal mine in terms of early careers. I think your data, the data that most recently you did, you didn't really see necessarily like a profound impact on early careers. Yeah. Like, why do you think it's not showing up to the extent? Because the conversation very frequently with early careers is pretty doom and gloom, and the experience of early new grad job seekers is pretty tough. So like, why don't you think it's showing up more in the data? Like, what do you think explains that?
So there's a couple of things. First, we're not seeing it in the aggregate data when it comes to volumes. So when we look at hiring for entry level versus hiring for experienced, we don't see statistically significant differences. However, we are seeing changes in the composition of hiring. So for example, we are seeing that some of the fastest growing jobs in terms of hiring for entry level workers are those that require both technical skills and very human skills. Things like content manager or IB analyst, of course, engineer, it's everywhere, but those are seeing a lot of traction. And some that are really decelerating are those that, the core skills are biased towards things that AI can do really well. So we're seeing it for medical scribe or for contract analyst. So that's starting to show up, again, not in the volume, but in the composition.
What about on your end?
Yeah, and when I presented that kind of notion of exposure, showing that like data scientists and programmers are exposed, want to be realistic about what that really means. So it's AI doing a lot of the tasks of that job, but it's still really hard to say whether that means like more or less demand for people in that occupation. I think historically, when a technology has come about that does a lot of some job, it has led to like less demand for people in that role. But even I think programming is a perfect kind of microcosm for this, and I'm sure there's like a lot of interesting stories about this in the room. But I talked to two engineering leaders in the same week who run 100+ person engineering teams, and one said, I can't justify hiring a junior developer in this context, and the other said, right now my most junior engineers are lapping the senior engineers because they embrace these tools so much. And so just the fact that both of them had these like opposing stories, I think says, just really shows how uncertain it is to kind of go from these numbers to like a really clear prediction. Yeah.
Can we talk about like AI jobs? Because there's a lot of conversations like all these AI jobs are getting created. And I think that LinkedIn's put out some interesting research around that. Can you share a little more like, first of all, what is an AI job? And yeah, what does the data tell you? Are more AI jobs being created than other jobs are being displaced? Like, what do the data actually share around that?
Yeah, so we track new jobs or emerging jobs in job postings. So we try to identify which are those things that didn't exist a couple of years ago and now people are hiring for. And some of them, I would say most of them are related to AI in one way or the other. Yep. So I would say there's two groups. The first group is very technical jobs. So head of AI, forward deployed engineer, or salesperson, or researcher, things like, a lot of.
And you associate it because AI is a skill in the.
AI is a skill. AI might be part of the title. It might be an AI native or like frontier company that is hiring for this role. So
a mix of things.
Yeah. Something else is data annotators. So these are very specialized people in any field who are helping validate and evaluate the models to make them better. And that is also growing really fast. So they're related to AI. And again, these are very highly skilled. Most people won't even be eligible for many of these roles. and it's an easy transition if you're already in the field. The other set of jobs is related to all the infrastructure that has to be in place for AI to actually work. And the most obvious one there is in data centers. So that includes anything from an engineer to a lot of blue-collar roles in maintenance, electricians, you name it. It's really showing up in data as something that is growing because there's growing investment.
Yep. The top exposed occupations that you had were program, like as computer software engineering, customer service, data entry, and then your top AI skill functions were like engineering, product research, I believe. Like, what are the talk about like those two lists? What do they have in common? Like, what makes a task susceptible to AI? Like, maybe it's intuitive, but just like very practically speaking, what's the common denominator?
Yeah. So this came up a bit in the slides, but a lot of things that are like programming adjacent, have seen a lot of gains in terms of like implementing it through an AI system. So that's why like data science is really up there. And I think you probably see it across all of your teams too. We see a lot more marketers doing data science because it's like a lot easier with Cloud Code or Cowork or like whatever like agentic system you're using. I think that one thing I would really watch closely in terms of the susceptibility is the human verification step. So with any piece of work that we do, the last bit of it is just checking if it's good. So like, let's say you just rattle off an email really quickly.
Yeah, we hope people are.
Yeah. If you rattle off an email really quickly, you look at it at the end just to see if you want to hit send. And so a lot of people are doing that with AI outputs, where they look at the end and see if they want to, like merge the PR or actually send it to their manager. And so with Cloud Code, the team recently released auto mode, which really shrunk that verification step, where it used to kind of stop and ask you a lot for, hey, is it cool if I do this? I'm gonna change a lot of files, or I'm about to like log into something. And then it was performant enough at making those calls that the time you had to take to hit accept just shrunk a lot in a mostly helpful way. And so that's what's going on with coding. But you could imagine this sort of auto mode for other jobs. So there's a lot of legal tasks are very heavy on the paperwork, could all kind of happen over the internet. And so the question there is like how far away are we from like auto mode for lawyers? Yeah.
Well, but we're also seeing it, in different occupations, we're seeing it at different speeds. I would assume, I will not even ask for a raise of hands. I will assume that everyone here is a heavy user of BrightHire. So I would say that, probably for BrightHire, every one of you, when you were going through an interview process, you had to do like very intense note-taking, and then summarization, sending notes to everyone involved in the hiring process. And now that's no longer something that you spend a lot of time on. And you're probably spending more time on having a really high-quality conversation that can drive business value and that can focus you on identifying that your candidate is a good fit because of the cultural values or because of past experience that you can really dig deep into because you're not so focused taking notes. So that is a shift in the composition of the skills of a TA leader that we're starting to see in the data because people are starting to move away from some of the tasks that tend to occupy a lot of the time and are core to doing the job into new things because they can really regain that time and refocus. And that has to do with adaptability and really using these tools, experimenting with these tools to impact our daily jobs. And again, it's not showing again in the big aggregate of data, but we're seeing qualitative movements there.
Oh yeah, and one other thing we've used to try and peer at this idea of susceptibility is to just ask people. So I think economists don't do enough of this, but we recently did a survey of.
So like last week it was released.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so we recently did a survey of 81,000 Claude users, and it was pretty open-ended. It was about like, what do you want from AI? How is AI not giving that to you? But then in people's like free-form responses, a lot of the topics were economic, and people were talking about their own jobs and how AI is affecting them in the workplace. And so what we did was we went through and coded up all those responses for how worried is this person about their job? changing really, really soon. And we looked at the correlation between that and the usage that we see in the economic index. So sort of that red area in that radar plot, like where Claude is being used right now. And the people who expressed like more concern about the job in the future were also those where we've been observing Claude do most of the tasks. And so that's sort of, separate from whatever we see. That's sort of kind of a wisdom of the crowd's take on, like what's going to happen with these jobs. And one other really striking thing was people would talk about how much they were sped up by Claude. So in some of these responses, there was an accountant who said, oh, there used to be this auditing workflow that I would do. And it would take me like 4 hours to set up. And then I vibe coded something with Claude Code, and now it's just like 10 minutes every time. But it was actually people like that who were experiencing the largest speed ups who also expressed the most concern about their own jobs, because they're seeing kind of their tasks shrinking and sort of looking for like what's going to fill that gap.
Were there any disconnects, meaning the task or the profession, like you're not seeing the spike in the actual Claude usage, but maybe like the crowd could see kind of over the next hill and there was a level of concern, or was it very correlated kind of generally across the board?
I think one kind of surprising thing was, I think that this might go in the opposite direction, but we see some legal work on Claude, but the lawyers who responded to the survey, they were really grumpy about just like the AI just not being able to follow every single detail. So that was one where I think having the input from like actual lawyers really kind of augments what we see in the data, where we're like, oh, there's like a lot of legal work, and then kind of like knowing the vibes around it really helps us to understand.
Yeah, there's a gap between what AI can technically do and not just like what individual people adopt, but certainly how organizations adopt. And how do you try to think about that? Because obviously your data is relying on like the actual usage. I'm curious your take on like where are we on that adoption curve, and then how much of a gap is there where it's not going to show up in the data because it's actually like an organizational thing, or but the technicals are there. If that makes sense.
Yeah, so this is really hard. I think one mantra that probably a lot of us have in the industry is, this is the worst that the AI models will ever be. And so I think if you just really like let that sink in, it's pretty startling. So
that's one way. That's one word to use. That's
yeah. Yeah. So we do try to get ahead of it. I think the way that the economic index tries really hard to do this is when we see a workflow happening, even if it's not really working, or there's just like a few pockets of activity where it's actually being done, we just kind of get out there and announce it to everybody. We publish about it. And so it could be that this will only be implemented, like this kind of thing, like let's say it's something in accounting or legal workflow. Like it could be that only gets implemented in an actual like enterprise a year or two down the road. And so it's kind of like these Waymos doing just a test drive in the parking lot. We're going to just try to announce it as soon as possible. And that's a little bit different from like, this is completely performant and you should implement it right away.
Yeah. Go. I was saying, going back to the kind of like the new AI jobs and roles, can you talk a little bit about like, maybe there's a specific example from the data where you've seen like the change the most in terms of like the description of the job, the titles, like the AI like infiltration? Is there something that jumps out from the research that you did? Yeah.
Yeah, so I agree it's very, very early days, but we're starting to see some hints there. There's, massive year-over-year growth in job postings requiring AI literacy skills. So not developing AI models, building your own agent, not any of that, but actually using AI, using it responsibly, using it ethically, being able to use it in a teamwork setting, and things like that. So we're monitoring that. We're also monitoring anything related to new jobs that could hint that AI is overcoming these workflow challenges. So something that I'm curious to see if it ever shows up in data is something like a manager of agents or similar, where there's a lot of talk on how agents are more capable and more autonomous and increasingly being able to do a lot of jobs that previously humans could do. So someone will have to manage them. Are they hiring for them? that is one. The other one is hiring for skills. So traditionally, you know better than me that we've been hiring for past experience or for degrees or for these signals that the market considers to be reliable. And now there's being a shift towards skills first hiring. So looking for evidence of some skills that might not come from degrees or from past experience, but can hint that someone can do a job that didn't exist a couple of years ago. So we are taking a close look at whether those pick up and recruiters are paying increasing attention to hiring for skills rather than degrees.
And one aspect of this like AI skills that came out for us in the data is with a lot of AI systems, you kind of get out what you put in, and there are differences in skills at AI use. So in the economic index, we try and assess whether a certain session with Claude was successful. Mm-hmm. And we find that the people who have more experience with Claude, who have just like signed up a lot earlier, their conversations, even when they're doing the exact same task, like writing a blog post or like writing code in a certain language, they're a lot more likely to be successful if they have higher experience.
How do you measure like success? What is the? Yeah.
So that's so we do this in a privacy preserving way, which means we're not looking at it. We're having another Claude read the conversation and just kind of describe for us what happens. And so basically, there's often a lot of tells where someone's like, "This is bad."
Yeah, that's not what I wanted at all. You stink.
Yeah. But it's totally fuzzy too.
Yeah. A lot of economists talk about Jalen's paradox. So when something gets cheaper, we use more of it. So efficiency engines, like led to us to more coal burn, not less, et cetera, et cetera. I'm curious. We talked about this in our prep, but do you see AI expanding demand for any kind of work in your data? Like, do you believe that because I think some folks will take the perspective of like, yeah, but this is different, right? There's not going to be a segue to more consumption because it's cheaper. And I'm curious what the evidence suggests in each of your data, to the extent that you have it around that, and maybe it's varied by role, but is there any evidence that's actually happening? I know you talked a little bit about software engineering.
Yeah.
I don't know if you think that's like a true side of this or just sort of maybe that's just like for now, but maybe not. But yeah, I'm curious what you saw.
So there's where we're seeing it for sure for software engineers, because that's a causal study. So we merged our data with GitHub data. So we know at the company level who is for sure adopting GitHub Copilot. So the hypothesis is, if you have a tool that can automate a worker because it does most of the skills that they are supposed to be uniquely doing, you should need fewer of those workers. And the intuition will tell you that, but the result is the opposite. So that means a couple things. So first, that at least for software engineers and GitHub Copilot, augmentation is probably being bigger than any automation. So companies are doing more with the same, if you want, instead of the same with less, which opens up a completely different discussion on what is the strategy in a context in which AI is diffusing so fast and is replacing so many human tasks. And I think leaders will really have to think hard on whether they want to focus on efficiency and, again, do the same with less. Do you want to keep the same outputs with fewer people and more AI? Or are you comfortable having some people who are working fewer hours and they're really smart and probably having more time in their hands to do other things, such as innovating, coming up with new business ideas, failing a lot maybe, but also trying a lot. So I think that's the kind of mentality and leadership shift that will tell apart who expands their market share in this very fast changing world and who maybe disappears.
Are you tracking, I would imagine you're tracking that at the functional and the kind of industry level, because I would imagine there's going to be a big difference based on the role and the industry, right? So is this a role, maybe it's you're not in a high profit focused industry, you're in a growth industry, and maybe the role is like, an offensive role versus like a defensive role or an operational role. Like, are you looking at that level of cross tabs or cross section, so to speak? Because I would imagine you might see a different paradigm in each of those? Like, are we just going to keep it the same, but we're going to have more and move? Like, so I'm curious if you've dug into that yet, and if that's kind of something that you're already looking at.
There's a lot of nuance, and it's fascinating. We're looking at different outcomes across big tech, for example, where you imagine first result will show up because they're like big tech is adopting faster than probably everyone else. In fin services, in professional services, in AI native companies and labs. But if anyone here has a hypothesis that we should be looking at in data, please find me and share it with me, because there's a lot that we can dig into, and there's a lot of fascinating questions that are important to answer.
Programming is a great example of like potentially Jevons paradox going on. There was one of the respondents to our large survey was a developer in India, and they said that when they used to work on all these easy bugs in their job, and then these AI models came around, and now all of the bugs that they have to fix are so hard. And it seems like some of our recent work in cyber shows that there's no shortage of bugs out there. And so, yeah, it could completely go from my perspective, like either way in terms of like employment for these kinds of roles.
I'm curious. I mean, you've put a lot of research lately, you as well. Is there a counterintuitive insight from the data that the folks in this room, probably need to internalize, maybe don't fully appreciate yet? Maybe it's something we've already talked about, but I'm curious, like something that really you think is very salient for the folks in this room in particular from the most recent work you've done.
I will go with kind of like an abstraction from the software engineers finding, which is that it is counterintuitive that more exposed jobs are actually adopting AI the most, and that comes from your research as well, because that is kind of like an adoption fallacy, right? You would expect that they are automated, but instead they're like leaning in and using AI more and experimenting with AI more in a way that is augmenting their jobs rather than displacing them. So I think that is something to watch. It's not a final result, it's very early days, but it is counterintuitive because everyone will have expected all these jobs to disappear overnight, and they're just not. They're just increasingly using AI instead.
Do you think it's because of the capabilities of the AI, or just because of the time it takes to go from like augmentation and then like the adoption and
it's probably a combination of both, and to that you have to add institutional challenges. So how does the real workflow of an entire company change after you adopt AI?
Task versus full job.
Exactly.
What about?
I think the most surprising thing, just from talking to people, is people expected there to be like really large impacts on unemployment today. So when they see the boring chart, they thought the line would be kind of skyrocketing up. And just the fact that even the potential dip in hiring that we see for these young workers, that could be part of a really kind of healthy response where the labor market kind of diverts young workers into slightly different lines of work. And so that makes me, relatively optimistic that we can get this information out there, and people are thinking about these issues to the extent that AI is being used for their tasks. And if there's enough information and there's not any really sudden changes, then this might not be like a very unusual transition into just like a slightly different occupational mix.
Do you believe that?
I think that there's a lot of uncertainty, so I'm like it's hard to make like a clear bet, but certainly a key ingredient for managing this well would be having the information as soon as we see one of these new workflows being automated.
And then that's a good transition. Like the top couple like leading indicators, or maybe they're like hotspot areas that as a research team, you're both really, really focused on over the next 12 months that you feel like is going to be important signal or a canary in the coal mine for maybe an important hypothesis you might have?
So I guess I've been talking about the economic index a lot. So just to kind of pick another source, I think it's really interesting to kind of scroll through the latest like Y Combinator batches, or whatever like startups you want to look at, because historically maybe like 5% of Y Combinator startups like go on to become unicorns. If you scroll through, you'll see a lot of AI for this, AI for that, and you could ask yourself, how will this and that be affected if this startup is really successful? So right now there's a few like YC companies that are doing like AI for accounting, and so that's that's one shift that it's really easy for me to imagine. So like next year, like around January, a company goes viral because they say that they're going to do your income taxes, and it's just like a 2-person team, and it costs $20, and they're going to like guarantee no mistakes or something. And yeah, it goes viral. Everyone's doing it. All of a sudden, a whole bunch of accounting shifts to this one Y Combinator company. That's why I'm sort of keeping tabs on startups as like a pretty interesting leading indicator on like the whole ecosystem.
Mar, what are you watching?
I would piggyback on that. I feel, just to add, the size of startups and how fast they can grow with fewer people is something to keep an eye on, to see if this hypothesis that AI is really shifting who does what and how they do it is taking place.
Because they don't have organizational debt.
Exactly, because they don't have to rethink how to restructure a very complicated workflow.
Yep.
They can just do it from scratch with AI from the very beginning. So I think size of startups is one definitely that to watch. And then what happens with the early adopters. So labs, AI native companies, big tech in some sectors or some functions. So that's what I would keep an eye on for sure.
Any other bold predictions before we go to questions? If you're allowed to make them, yeah. Pass. Yeah. Mar.
I will go with job creation. I'm an optimist at heart, but I'm also seeing a lot of that in the data. So if I had to make a prediction, it would be that we'll be surprised about the number and diversity of new jobs that will exist in a couple of years that we cannot even think of today.
Interesting. Questions for, yeah, well, there's a couple. We'll start, over here, just two.
Thank you. This is awesome. I might have missed this on the tiny chart. So question for Mar. As you're thinking about the shift to people skills, have you seen that shown up in the job descriptions or in the people who are getting jobs? Or is this something you anticipate coming? And if so, anything specific within that you imagine would be more important?
Thank you for the question. So this is a question about human skills. Just a clarification on the chart, those are like the top most representative human skills of jobs today. So we look at the composition of each job and what skills members are adding to their profile, and we are able to identify how many of those skills are human and how many of those skills are replicable by AI, and that's the position of each teeny tiny dot, I apologize for, in that teeny tiny chart.
I think it's R, we should have had it.
Every year we publish what we call Skills on the Rise, which is a complex methodology that looks at the top skills required by job postings, also top skills added by members who just got hired, and the top skills of members in general. And we see which are the fastest growing ones over time. And what we see this year, we just published in February, what we see is that besides AI engineering and working with AI, I think 3 out of the top 5 ones are people skills. They're related to leadership, to people management, to teamwork, to strategy. So these are definitely showing up in a list that historically predominantly had Python there. So that means that those technical skills that were kind of like the recommendation for a future-proof skilling are changing dramatically. Of course.
Eric, I think you had a question as well. Yeah.
First of all, awesome presentation. I found it really encouraging. I was admittedly pessimistic. I'm really, really worried about the impact on early talent in particular. And Maxim, I'm trying to reconcile your presentation, the red versus the blue in certain areas, and only kind of half the occupational kind of landscape was represented there in terms of the blue relative to the white. And I'm trying to reconcile your comments with Dario's recent comments about 50% of white collar jobs being eliminated. I think you said by 2030 or something.
Yeah, so I think that's sort of where we're seeing the action right now, is this like slight slowdown in hiring for early career workers. So I think that is still possible and like not inconsistent with the data that we're seeing so far. So I would say basically I share that concern, and that's why this is one of the things that like we're watching the most closely.
So it's just like the data is very early, is your sense?
The data is super early, and then early career workers, which in our case it's 22 to 25-year-olds, that is a pretty small share of the labor market. So even if that kind of crisp prediction like came to fruition, that might not even manifest as like an impact on like the unemployment rate in the country. So that would still be like a huge concern, but we would need to like zoom in to detect that.
And part two is also personal, because my son's in that band, that age band, and graduated college recently, about a year or two ago, and he's struggling in the market, although he's got a good education, et cetera. I will say anecdotally, what I'm finding is that CEOs are making this a self-fulfilling prophecy. So you saw the Jack Dorsey comment, I guess, a few months ago. Well, the layoff, obviously. I think there is somebody here from Square, so I don't want to be too descriptive here. But I do think that, and you hear this from CEOs of large enterprises about these kind of labor cuts. But I think this, in my mind, is aspirational. I mean, from some of the people that I talk to, that, hey, if we cut it, the gap will be filled ultimately through automation and innovation. I mean, do you have any comments around that as well?
Yeah, so I hear you that a lot of the moves that CEOs are making seem a little speculative, because it's these roles where, I can't do that yet. However, I do think that if we're doing some things to prepare more broadly for AI, like kind of suddenly being good at this or that, then I do kind of see that as sort of a healthy response, because in general, the suddenness of the change is what'll make it like really harmful in the labor market. And so if you have some CEOs here or there, just like a little like more gradually thinking like, I'm not going to hire so much for this role, I'm not even going to do like layoffs today, I'm just going to like slow hiring, then that's the way to kind of smooth out these disruptions. And so yeah, when I see these kind of speculative slowdowns in hiring growth, I think it might be like a proper way to respond to the uncertainty about like what's coming down the pike.
Yeah, we'll keep going. Noah.
Thanks, guys. This has been really enlightening. A quick question, I think, from Mar. With all of the early in career that we've seen, everyone's kind of concerned now, which really seems it's more focused on the tech side. Are you seeing any industry where the early in career is actually starting to have a bit of an uptick that historically we haven't seen?
I think this summer will be crucial for us to actually see some of that effect, like a larger scale. What we're seeing so far is that the fastest growing skill for entry level, the fastest growing career for entry level is associated with AI engineering. So there is some effect of that. I think that fundamentally, how we think about entry level jobs will need to change, because there's a lot of tasks that will help you grow in your career and that you learn only in entry-level work that are no longer useful. Think of like a paralegal. That first job, before even going to law school, where all you do is read different papers, different documents, put together lists of references, proof check documents. How much time can they save now by just using AI, and what can they do with their time? But we do need paralegals, because then we need people to go to law school to then become lawyers, because you don't want to outsource your divorce to AI, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that
next YC company, $20 divorce.
We're brainstorming ideas.
Yeah.
But that chain needs to keep going, right? And part of that will mean really rethinking and reestablishing what it means to be an entry-level worker. What are the skills that will make you adaptable? Things like growth mindset, things like influencing, talking to people, presenting something very technical in language that anyone can understand, instead of all the other things that now turns out we're comparably not so good at.
All right, I'll do one more. Can we do one more? Can we go? Yeah. Do you have a question? No.
It's actually more about comments. So Kyle Forrest with Lloyd, I talked to CHROs
workforce, inclusive of early career. And one of the things I link into this is demographic shifts. We had the largest graduating class, high school class in the US in 2025 ever, where we'll have fewer people graduating high school, fewer people going to college, fewer people entering the early career workforce. That's just a math equation. So in one sense, you could say we actually need to lean in harder to AI and automation to augment the fewer humans we will have in the prime working age range. I think one of the things as well, many of the cities around the country where data centers are being built are pushing back on the data center build. So we will see the slowdown in the ability to deliver on the compute power to deliver on some of the estimated white-collar job disruption. So I think there's a lot of things, which gets, but I think to both of your points, for like, where could this go? How do you prepare for it? And then I think also with the comment on the CEO signaling, I'm also seeing like companies now like Mark Benioff the other day, hey, we're hiring 1,000 interns in early career at Salesforce this summer, right? So there are some CEOs who are now signaling the other way, like we're gonna go double down on early career workers. Like IBM was like, we're tripling. So there's some really interesting things relative to like the pendulum that I just wanted to throw out as other data points, because I think in the market for the last year and change, certainly there's been a lot of concern around what do we do? And maybe like my last data point, in the last week, I've had multiple, as a consulting firm, leaders reach out and say, help us design rotational programs. Because everyone would acknowledge hiring into early career, traditional ways we've done it, is not gonna build the right leaders that we need in the future. It's a lot of shifts. So I just wanted to throw some of those out there as other things, because I missed the first part of the panel. And I was like, has any of the demographic shifts been discussed here? And the answer was no. So I wanted to throw out some of those things that I think are good intersections into this.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, not a question, many
All right,
comments.
I think I'm gonna get the official like wooden hook and pull me off the stage if we don't stop. But Tracy, you can, I know you had a question, but maybe we can grab Maxine after. Yeah.
Going off of that, I'll try to squeeze that in. Here's my case. So going off of that, I'm curious if you've seen any signals from universities and how they are changing potentially to prepare for the future. And if not, if we think universities are a little bit behind and slow to move, what are the ways that you would hypothesize or advise universities need to adapt to these pieces that you've seen, not only the changing occupations, but also more of the focus on the human-centered skills?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really key question that we've been like thinking about a lot. It's hard. And our hope is that the data that we put out on these like automation patterns, that could be the backbone of like a career guide of the future. We do think that like AI fluency is a skill. Like you can learn how to use these tools and like get pretty good at them. You get out what you put in. But yeah, apart from that, we just want to see like a lot of experimentation there, and it's the people skills, which I think are like a really important part of college. Like those are the things that really stand out as like you still need that in like whatever labor market. And so I think the one thing I'm really bullish on is like building on that. Yeah.
We are part of a committee with the Universities of California system, and they're thinking very hard about this question because, of course, they want to make sure their curriculums are useful and up to date. And one of the key elements we're focusing on is AI fluency. But there's also a huge discussion on durable skills and fundamental problem solving and thinking, which is not so easy to tackle. Teachers or professors are also part of these conversations, and something that they point out is that there's not a lot of clarity on what to do, and there's not a lot of data, so anything on that is really helpful. And many of them are overworked and underpaid, and it turns out that it's very challenging to come out with a new curriculum and also collect data and evaluate and improve it over time when you have so little resources. So if that's a challenge in the universe, like in California, you can even start thinking of what that means in the developing world or anywhere else in the world. So we're very early days. It's really important that we have the information available, that we're having those discussions, and that we keep that in mind so that we can, again, rethink how the education system needs to work in this context.
All right, well, thank you so much. This was an awesome panel, and I appreciate you all coming and sharing your data. And I would love to circle back in 6 or 12 months, because I'm sure you'll have a lot more interesting data at the time. And I think it'd be interesting to like update the finding and see like how things have changed. But yeah, I want to thank Mar and Maxim.